Hi, welcome to the Rundown Movies. In today's video, I am going to explain an American psychological thriller titled The Intruder from 2019. Before we begin, warning, spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. A married couple, Scott and Annie, plan to buy a house in the countryside. In their search, they are informed about a secluded house named Foxglove in Napa Valley. As they visit the house, they get scared to hear gunshots, but find out it's just an old man hunting a deer. He introduces himself as Charlie Pack, the owner of the house, and invites them inside to have a look. While showing them around, he tells them about his family, including his wife who died of cancer, and his daughter who has moved to Florida. He also mentions his temporary residence at the nearby Royal Hotel and shares his plan of moving to Florida to live with his daughter. Both Scott and Annie love the house and instantly agree to buy it from him. As they move in, Charlie hands over the keys and gives them some instructions about the house before leaving. Annie feels sad for him, as he had to sell his house, but Scott thinks she should be happy about her new house instead. They invite their friends over where Scott tells them about Charlie and his odd behavior. Mike goes outside to smoke and feels like someone is watching over him. Before leaving, he spots a cigarette burn on his car seat and tells them about it, but they all agree he did it himself. Mike insists someone else did it, but no one believes him. The next day at his office, Scott receives a call from Annie who tells him that Charlie is at the house mowing their lawn. She comes outside to talk to him, but he says the grass was getting out of control, so he thought to help them cut it. When Scott comes back, she tells him about Charlie and that she invited him over for Thanksgiving dinner because she knows it's hard for him to move out. Charlie comes over for dinner and admires Annie for maintaining the house so well. Scott shows him around and tells him about all the renovations they have made, but Charlie gets upset about it. At the dinner, the discussion turns toward the house, and Mike suggests making some changes, but Charlie disagrees by saying it will damage the integrity of the property. Mike mocks him for being so emotional about the house. Although he gets angry with Mike, does not show any reaction. Charlie and Mike talk outside again, where Mike asks him about coming back to the house, but he says he just stops by to check on it. After Charlie leaves, Mike tells him that he thinks he was the one who marked his car seat with a cigarette. He says Charlie still thinks it's his house and watches them through the woods. They don't believe him, but he urges Scott to come with him and look in the woods. When they go outside, Scott realizes anyone can look right into the house from outside. They spot some car tires, but Scott thinks they are from the hunters who regularly hunt in the woods. They also spot a car, but it drives away before they can have a look. Scott hires security staff to fix cameras around the house, but Charlie comes over and starts yelling at them for making changes in his house. Scott expresses his concerns about the security and Charlie suggests keeping a gun instead. Scott tells him about his trauma with the guns after his brother was shot in front of him. Scott gets suspicious about the house and goes outside to check while Charlie still watches over him through the dark. After a few days, Scott and Annie spot him with a gun outside the house again, but he helps them unload the Christmas tree from the car. He also shows them the garage where he kept all his decoration stuff and intends to take it inside the house with them. Scott gets angry with him for coming over again and warns him not to come without informing them earlier. He accepts his mistake and apologizes to him before leaving. Annie argues with him for misbehaving with Charlie, but Scott thinks he needs to realize his limitation as he acts as the house still belongs to him. Charlie overhears Scott saying it's his house and not Charlie's. Annie does not believe his concerns about Charlie and thinks he does not like the house and wants to move out, but he disagrees with her by saying he just needs some time to adjust. Charlie comes over again in Scott's absence and says he tried to call Scott, but he did not pick up. Annie apologizes for his behavior earlier. He accepts the apology and offers his help in decorating the house. She invites him over and shares she wanted to get a house in the countryside to start a family with Scott. As she talks to him, Charlie cannot stop thinking about her. During the conversation, she receives a message from Scott informing her about a meeting. She calls him and they get into an argument while Charlie overhears them. Scott comes back earlier and asks about the decorations, to which Annie tells him about Charlie that he helped her decorate. It leads to another fight as Scott does not like him at all, but Annie does not pay much attention to his concerns. She asks about his message instead and shows her concern by saying the last time he texted her, he was with another girl. They sleep into different rooms, but Scott gets suspicious again and starts looking around the house as he thinks somebody is still there. Annie comes over and apologizes for her behavior earlier. They make out in the living room while Charlie observes them again. The next day, Scott meets a neighbor who asks about his new house and Charlie. He reveals that Charlie tells everybody about his wife who died of cancer, but in reality, she was killed by one of his short guns. Scott gets worried and again looks around the house, but can't find anything suspicious. He also tells Annie about Charlie's wife, but she thinks he is just overreacting. He tells her that he learned about some murder charges against Charlie, but the case did not proceed due to the lack of evidence. Scott informs her that Charlie is after her since they moved in, but she does not believe him and says it will be over because he is moving to Florida. But Scott asks her to stop Charlie from coming to the house again. They go outside for the dinner, and while passing through the Royal Hotel, Scott suggests checking on Charlie. Annie thinks it's not a good idea, but he forces her to come. They come over to Charlie, but things get heated as both he and Scott accuse each other of spying. Scott asks him to stay away from his wife and says she is too nice to tell him, but he is telling him to keep his distance. Annie stops him and before leaving apologizes for his behavior again. The next morning when Scott goes out to jog, someone hits him off the road with his car. Annie visits him in the hospital, but just has a few minor injuries, so he sends her back home. Scott calls Mike telling him that he thinks it was Charlie who ran him off the road. He further says Charlie is obsessed with his house and now with Annie. He asks him to run a background check on Charlie because he wants to know about his history. At night, Charlie stops by the house and asks about Scott's health. Annie invites him over to have dinner with her. Mike comes over to Scott and reveals that Charlie was involved in serious legal battles as his entire construction business went under and he was forced to sell his house due to financial issues. Scott regrets his decision of buying the house from Charlie, but it's too late now. He asks Mike to go to the house to check on Annie as she is alone. When Mike arrives there, he spots Charlie's car outside the house and sees him having dinner with Annie. Charlie spots him outside the house and tells Annie that someone is watching over them, and he wants to go outside to check. Charlie chases him and starts talking to him, even asking for a cigarette to smoke. Mike gets relieved, but Charlie declares he can get it all back from Scott and just needs to get rid of him. Before Mike can understand anything, Charlie kills him with an axe. He comes back to the house and pretends to be hurt, but Annie does not realize anything and offers her help to walk him outside the house. The next morning, Scott is discharged from the hospital and spots Charlie outside the house again and gets angry to see him carrying flowers which he intends to give to Annie. Scott discloses knowing about the charges against him and threatens to stay away from the property. He comes to the house and tells Annie about him, but she replies he did not come over this morning. Scott asks about Mike, whom he sent over to check on her, but Annie reveals no one except Charlie came over to the house. She tells him Charlie came over asking about his health, but Scott realizes no one told him about his accident. He tells her that he suspects Charlie knocked him down the road, and she believes him this time. Scott advises her to inform 911 immediately if he comes over again. He calls the police and asks to get a restraining order against Charlie. While in the office, he tries to contact Mike, but he does not return any of his calls. Scott receives a call back from the police, informing him that Charlie never stayed at the Royal Hotel. Scott gets further information about Charlie and learns his daughter Cassidy changes her name 2 years ago, the same time Charlie's wife died. He calls Cassidy and tries to ask about Charlie, but she drops it instantly. Meanwhile, Charlie comes over again to talk to Annie in private and says she might hear bad things about him, but those are all lies. She gets upset by his attitude and asks him to leave. When he goes outside, she locks all the doors and the windows but realizes someone is still inside the house. While searching through the house, Annie spots that the linen closet Charlie showed them earlier is movable. Soon she finds out there is a cellar behind it. She goes inside to check and finds Charlie's stuff, learning that he has been living there all along. She goes upstairs toward the side door, but he spots her and starts chasing her. As she tries to run away from him, she gets shocked to see Mike's dead body and starts fighting with Charlie with him, but he knocks her down. Meanwhile, Scott, who is driving toward the house, receives a call from Cassidy, who tells him that her father is a pathological liar. She also reveals he killed his wife because she threatened to file a divorce and take his house. After listening to this, Scott tries to call Annie, but she does not pick up. Back at the house, Charlie strangles her and tries to assault her, but Scott comes back and starts fighting with him. In the meantime, Annie frees herself and attacks Charlie. He runs to his cellar to bring his gun while Scott and Annie hide behind a door. Annie tells him that he was living under the house the whole time. Charlie loads his gun and comes back up to attack them, but Scott and Annie manage to defeat him. In the end, Scott shoots him while Annie calls the police, informing them that her husband shot an intruder.